energy, why we are in a new energy crisis because of both sins of commission and omission when it comes to energy policy. I pointed out one of the things that Janet Yellen had been an advocate of, and that is to using Wall Street as a bludgeon against the traditional energy industry. Some of you may not know that she was appointed Treasury Secretary, and I did mention this yesterday, not because of her experience at the Fed or in finance, but because chiefly of her role as a founding member of the Climate Leadership Council. I'm going to read you a quote here, and this is from December 1st, 2020, when President-elect Biden pointed her out as the Treasury Secretary nominee for his incoming administration. This is a statement from Climate Leadership Council's CEO, Greg Bertelsen. Quote, "Congratulations to Janet Yellen on her historic nomination as U.S. Treasury Secretary. As a founding member of the Council, Janet has been a steadfast partner in our effort to achieve a bipartisan breakthrough on climate. America will be fortunate to have such a brilliant and principled public servant steering economic policy during this difficult time." So without any official announcement or fanfare or change to the Constitution or laws of this country, we have just been reminded that today, at least some of the qualifications to be Treasury Secretary will be your climate change bona fides. And so far, it's not going all that well. So we're going to talk about energy today from a number of different angles. We're going to talk about energy policy from different angles. As we said in the program and in some of the discussions leading up to this, there is not a single more important issue facing us where public policy intersects investment themes, which also intersects our costs as consumers and as citizens, truly, going forward. And so we've got, if I may say, a star-studded lineup up here that's going to look at this from a variety of different areas. Some areas they all specialize in, some areas we might overlap on. And I want to start to my immediate right with Emily Hirsch. When I asked a colleague who he would recommend we have on hand here, Emily's was the first name that came up, and as soon as I got a hold of her, she was very gracious and excited to come. She is a CEO of a company called Luna Lithium, which she has been building in Nevada, and which I believe is going to be going public in a not-too-distant future. But beyond that, and I can't do justice to her entire resume, believe it or not, but she has been involved all over the world, mostly in South America and Argentina. She's helped start companies. She's helped women to have greater roles in public companies and in the energy industry. She's a senior, I got to get this one right, Emily, because otherwise I might get in trouble. Believe it or not, you look at her, she looks like she's one of my oldest granddaughter, which makes me feel old. But she is so well traveled. She's a senior fellow at the Colorado School of Mines and the Payne Institute. So a lot of experience here. She's going to talk to us all about lithium, the industry, battery metals, public policy, and so forth. Next to her, excuse me, we have Ryan Sistad. Ryan is going to look at this from kind of a citizen's perspective and also a public policy perspective when it comes to battery metals. I ran across Ryan quite a while back through his organization, Better in Our Backyard. And he's headquartered in Duluth, Minnesota, which is of course, one of the main shipping centers for iron, for other metals, for a lot of things in this country for a lot of years. Very near to that, of course, is Polymet Mining and their North Met project up on the western part of the Iron Range of Minnesota. Next to that is Twin Metals, Minnesota, closer to the Boundary Waters area. He's also been working with Enbridge, the pipeline company. And if I may say, Ryan has been a trooper in trying to get people to understand that we should be taking our own destiny back into our own hands. so that we have the ability to build this green economy within our own four walls. And Ryan's going to speak a lot to that. Next to him, of course, is Scott Melby, who you just heard from. I've known Scott for a lot of years. Before Scott and I met, I had the pleasure of knowing a guy named Neil McMillan, who was once the president of Cloud Resources, but was also non-executive chairman of Cameco and the head of Atomic Energy Canada. He was the one back 15, 18 years ago that got the uranium bug into me, and so we enjoyed a nice run before the market peaked in 2011. These days, there's not anybody I know of who is more versed globally with what's going on in the industry than Scott is. And you're going to hear from him more beyond what you just heard. And last but certainly not least, we're very pleased to have Phil Flynn here, who is to the old energy economy, if you will, what Scott Melby is to the uranium industry. Yes, we'll do that.
Thank you. All right, there we go.
Phil is especially a joy to have because he's even more sarcastic than I am, which is hard to believe, but he is.
No.
When it comes to talking about a lot of different things. He's a very well-known personality in the Chicagoland area. He works with Price Futures Group and the Chicago Board of Trade. He's also a regular on Fox. If you can't miss him. He's on our pretty much daily, whether it's on Fox Business or on the weekends sometimes with Neil Cavuto or Maria Bartiromo or whoever's turn it is to have him on the weekend. So we're going to go down the line kind of like I did last night when we had our macro panel up here. And starting with Emily, I want to ask each of you, what is the single most important takeaway? And this, we're going to start with this, not end with this. We're going to start with this. What is the single most important takeaway? If you can drill it into everybody's head in here, everybody's watching this later online and on YouTube and whatever, what is the single most important thing that you can put in everybody's head to take away from here, Emily?
Steep one. I would say energy is the cornerstone of human civilization, and power from a geopolitical standpoint derives from humanity's ability to produce and move around energy. And electrification is upon us. Fossil fuels will be a thing of the past, and the folks who achieve the prize of owning the battery industry and the electrification channels will be the folks who come out on top of a geopolitical shuffle in the future.
Okay. Ryan?
Pretty short. The renewable energy industry is going to create a huge demand for minerals like copper and nickel. That like a catalyst of minerals that we've never even seen before in terms of demand. And currently right now, China controls most of that supply. So as long as we continue to keep offshoring that demand and not allowing projects like Polymet or Twin Metals in northern Minnesota through, or lithium mining projects here in the U.S., we'll still continue to be reliant on countries that don't have the same environmental and labor standards as we do, even though we're trying to supposedly fight climate change.
Yeah, thanks. Scott?
Yeah, clearly the generational opportunity to invest in a commodity that is probably in the first or second inning of the latest bull market in uranium. And it's a realization of nuclear energy's key role as part of the mix. It's not competing against wind and solar, it's backing up wind and solar. It's the 24/7 carbon-free source that allows wind and solar to be intermittent and run 30% of the time. But, just seeing the success that many of you had as investors in the last bull market, we still had half the world against us in 2005 to 10. Today we have political left and right, we have industrialists, environmentalists. That's a huge tailwinds for us to really move forward. And as investors in commodities, we've got a commodity here that's being produced at a rate of 60 million pounds a year, less than the 20 million pounds a year of consumption. Inventories have obviously made up the gap, but we're shifted now from an inventory-driven market to production-driven. So look for those companies that have scalable, permitted, licensed production that can move quickly, be in the lower two quartiles of production costs globally, and I think you'll do very well with uranium investments in this environment.
Phil, it was you and I talked about this ahead of the conference. It was 2 years ago that the oil price went negative,
Right,
briefly.
good old days.
Natural gas, you couldn't give it away in Western Canada or a lot of the
Right.
Northeast U.S. And here we are with booming prices for both, but not for the usual reasons. We have, believe it or not, I guess, chronic shortages in that. So
We do. Isn't it crazy? You know, I think if you go back, you know, I was going to start off with energy tomorrow. What could stir one's imagination more? I usually do that at all the speeches, so it's a really good speech. You should hear it sometime. But really, seriously, what we're going through in energy has happened since the earliest days of energy. Did you know that? We go through up cycles and down cycles since the beginning of time. Does anybody remember peak oil here? Raise your hand. Peak oil? Right.
Yeah.
When was that? When was peak oil? When were we running out of oil?
90s or something? like
90s? Actually, it was about the 1800s. We were running out of whale oil, okay? And that was the first time we had peak oil. And I think with these distinguished people here that I'm probably not worthy to be on the same stage with most of them, you know. I came in here hating lithium, you know. Then I met Miss Hirsch, and I'm like, I was wrong, you know. But we're in a incredible time for energy unlike anything we've seen in a generation. We are in a new super cycle, okay? And we saw prices go to record highs, to record lows, to record highs, and we've seen that time and time again. And from an investment opportunity, energy right now is probably the best investment of this generation, okay? And I'm the old guy, old oil and gas. I'm supposed to defend oil and gas, right? And part of the reason we're in the crisis we're in now is part of the cycle. But part of it is short-sighted understanding of where oil and gas fits in the energy transition. I mean, we just have to look at what's going on in Europe. We've got a war going on. I think it's the first new war of the Green New Deal, okay? That's what I call it. Because it's been driven in part by short-sighted energy policy by politicians, the quick runoff of let's shut down oil and gas and go to wind and alternatives overnight without thinking of the consequences. Short-sighted thinking about, hey, we want a green energy transition, but we can't do it on the backs of the poor and the middle class that are going to get crushed if you don't do it smart. And listen, I'm an everything and above energy guy. I was anti-lithium till today, but I've changed my mind. But I just think it's so many opportunities, and there's so many ways to go about it. So this team, you're going to learn a lot today. You're going to find some fantastic opportunities. It's not for everybody investing in this stuff, but I think it's an exciting conversation, and I'm glad everybody's here because we took energy for granted. I'm glad that everybody here isn't because they know this is the place to be.
Thanks, Phil. You know, yesterday when we started off, and it's appropriate to repeat this today because I want to ask each of our panelists next a question on their perspective of this. But years ago, Marcy Kaptur, who is a Democrat congresswoman from Ohio, longest serving Democrat woman in the House ever, she gave a special order speech, which is what you're able to do as a sitting member of the House when the regular business is over and you get up and you want to talk about whatever just comes into mind. And she gave a speech. I contacted her office once. They didn't have a video of it. I wish it was out there. I wish it was required. I wish you had to watch this to vote, okay? And what she said about 20 years or so ago was that this country is in terrible, terrible danger because we have no national energy policy. When the Democrats are in charge, it's put the fossil fuel industry out of business and build solar panels and windmills. When Republicans are in charge, it's drill, baby, drill, and we don't need to worry about tomorrow. And she said we needed to do something no less serious than the space program, no less serious than the Marshall Plan at the end of the Second World War. On that latter thing, Jamie Dimon, the head of J.P. Morgan, just pretty much repeated that same thing recently. Because when he was asked about how he sees things from a perspective of one of the most powerful bankers on the planet and all the different moving parts of his industry. He said, look, if we don't get this energy thing straightened out, everything I look at in front of me is screwed. You know, whether it's jobs, the growth of the economy, every moving part of the economy, because beyond labor, when you just look at costs, there is no single bigger input to everything than the cost of energy. So, Emily Hirsch, from your perspective in the lithium industry and maybe battery metals more broadly, what would be the kind of Marshall Plan idea that you would have for those segments of energy?
Yeah, good question. I actually used to, before I had the idea to actually go dig some holes myself, I did a podcast for about 8 months called the Minerals Manhattan Project, because I thought that a need to take a Manhattan Project-esque approach to the battery industry, but also critical minerals in the United States more broadly, was a necessity, because for the first time in a while, the United States is in a role of needing to innovate into uncertainty. So Wall Street and a lot of the traditional financial organizations are very accustomed to being able to more properly quantify risk and more properly understand or predict where an industry is going. Whereas when it comes to the lithium battery supply chain, you've got a much more complex from the ground into the technology process, and then you've got technological innovation that's happening at each portion of these supply chains. And so the ability to finance these and look long-term means looking into markets that are very uncertain, markets that are very small, markets that have a lot of price volatility, and not a lot of examples, right? If you're going to go build an oil and gas refinery, you're going to go build a gold refinery, you can look to hundreds of operating plants. When you're going to look to, for example, a lithium brine production operation, 10 years ago, you were looking at 2 in the world. And so the ability to finance and the ability to write billion-dollar checks into construction of projects that you have a lot of uncertainty about what the market's going to look like, a lot of uncertainty about how the technology may shift over time, the United States really just took a back seat. And I like to say frequently that, China writes checks and the U.S. writes reports. The Chinese have been out all over the world with, it's not a secret plan. It's on a piece of paper. It's the Belt and Road Initiative. It's get out there and buy up the mineral resources that are going to underpin the energy industry over the next, century. And so I think that what the United States should do is write fewer reports and take a page out of the Chinese book and say, okay, how do we get money into the hands of companies that are out there and in the industry? And also, how can we take some of the risks away? So rather than looking at, putting money behind companies directly, say, okay, for example, and this is something that I think we're moving towards with the invocation of the Defense Production Act related to critical minerals, but say, okay, maybe the government puts a price floor for spherical graphite, right? So something to take one of the risks away or one of the risks off the list for banks or financial actors that are looking at putting money into these sectors. But it's really difficult to give an answer to that question because I don't think most people have a firm understanding of just how far behind the United States is, not just on the mining, but on the exploration, the mining, the upstream production of sort of every single piece of the battery supply chain except for the end vehicle.
That's good points, and I love that name, the Minerals Manhattan Project. That's good. Ryan, kind of almost to springboard off of what Emily just said, you might have, of everybody here, the most difficult job because you're trying to get Joe Sixpack and Sally Soccer Mom and everybody else to understand that this green economy that everybody or a lot of people are pining for. Look, we all want to see sustainability, we all want to see less carbon emissions, et cetera. But one of your sponsors, Enbridge, was asked to leave winter before last as the sponsor of the American Birkebeiner up in Hayward, Wisconsin. And this is the job that Ryan has, folks. This bunch of people, this board, with this big Nordic-like ski event every winter up in Wisconsin, decided they didn't want Enbridge as a sponsor any longer because Enbridge is a dirty, old energy fossil fuel company. Yet all of the people that get there, of course, are burning fossil fuels to get there. Every piece of equipment, article of clothing on their bodies is a derivative of petroleum. And so maybe I'm kind of half answering your question for you, so I'll shut up. But from your perspective, trying to get the public to understand that there's actually work to be done, there's parts of these things, including, resources in our own backyard. How do you handle that? How do you give people a message? Really an answer to my question, I guess.
Well, one, you have to educate them. So like in our area, there's a lot of folks that are against Enbridge, obviously, and they don't know or they don't realize. Like one project that we had going on over the past couple of years was Enbridge's Line 3 replacement project, which was about a 60-year-old pipe that needed to be replaced. Basically with just modern day technology. I mean, it was pretty straightforward, and it ended up being the longest reviewed pipeline project in Minnesota's history. It took 7 years to permit a pipeline that basically brought in $3 billion in economic output and over 4,200 union jobs into northern Minnesota. But people wanted to stop it. They didn't want it to be replaced without realizing that if Line 3 doesn't get replaced, there's going to be over 2,000 tanker trucks that are going to have to transport that oil from Canada to Superior. So which has a larger footprint? Transporting through a tanker truck or transporting it through a pipeline? And another thing too that a lot of people didn't understand too with pipelines is that they're 4.5 times safer than rail. And so a lot of folks, when like the Sierra Club, or when they denounce pipeline companies or oil and gas companies, they forget about the cause and effect. So if you stop pipelines, you're going to have to transport oil through either tanker trucks or through rail cars, which are more carbon intensive and less safe for communities. And like what you said, a lot of people don't realize that the clothes that we wear come from petroleum products. I mean, they're even as we get more into a renewable energy future, we're still going to need the oil and gas industry. Tesla is still going to need to use oil products for the plastic in their cars. You're always going to need the oil and gas industry, and kind of similar to Scott's points on uranium being more reliant than wind and energy, the same can be said for natural gas, or Phil saying an all above the energy approach. All these components are going to be extremely important moving forward. So I would say number one, educate, and then also two, just also educate them on the jobs that these industries support. A lot of people don't realize that either, that if you shut down a pipeline or if you demonize an oil company, think about all the family paying jobs in your area that might be affected and how that potentially could decimate your own region's economy. So a lot of things I've noticed is that simply that people who are either against mining projects or the oil and gas industry are simply not educated enough or haven't been explained simply on what the oil and gas industry means to the area and to the world.
So in short, we need to get the milk from the grocery store crowd to realize that milk doesn't come from a grocery store.
That's right.
Pretty much.
Yeah.
It doesn't?
And before I got this job, I mean, I'm guilty of not connecting the dots either. I mean, that happens when you grow up in the Twin Cities area in Minnesota. So,
Scott, your job is a bit easier, I think I would have to say, because as you pointed out earlier, talking about UEC specifically, there has been a broader reawakening for nuclear energy, but notwithstanding that, what would you say from your perspective with nuclear energy industry would be your, quote, Marshall Plan type of approach?
Yeah, well, it's two-part answer. First, the successes, and then the continued challenges that we have. As Chris said, we have received incredible bipartisan support, but really in the last 3, 4, 5 years, Cory Booker out of New Jersey and Senator Barrasso out of Wyoming agree on very few things, but they both like nuclear power. And so it's not surprising that even in the polarized House and Senate and U.S. politics that we've faced and face today, they are coming together on nuclear legislation. They are supporting advanced and small modular reactors with streamlined licensing and permitting. They are providing sort of public-private dollars to get the first-of-a-kind plants built in Idaho and Wyoming and eastern Washington with companies like X-Energy, TerraPower, NuScale. They are recognizing that some of these advanced reactor designs rely on Russian-type fuels that we've lost our capability to make. It's just like in critical and rare earth minerals, where we have the resources here, but we lost the processing capacity. And we've done that with these advanced reactor fuels. So there's a desire to get our industry revitalized to be able to be self-reliant in these advanced reactor fuels. So, you know, this is encouraging. I've testified in the U.S. Senate, House, and Senate Natural Resources and Energy Committee twice in the last year. 5-10 years ago, that would have been a very hostile environment for me as a nuclear energy expert to go in and talk about reviving nuclear energy in the United States. It's not the case anymore. We have just as many thoughtful questions from the left as we do from the right, and that's very encouraging. Now, the challenge is kind of what Ryan was talking about, is everybody loves the green energy. Everybody wants electric vehicles, but no one's thinking about, well, where does the lithium, nickel, cobalt, copper, and the uranium that goes into the clean energy that fuels the electric vehicle come from? And they're like, oh, no, we don't want the mining. We just want the green energy. We just want the electric vehicles. And it's like, it's almost, I mean, it is naive to think that we get all the great things in an industrialized society, an advanced society like ours, without mined minerals. And so we still are facing pockets of opposition from members of the House and Senate that just don't want to see mining. I don't know where they want mining to occur. I guess in other countries where they don't have the same health, safety, environment standards that we have. I can tell you, when we mine in Texas and Wyoming, these are global leading standards in all those areas, and we are ESG leaders. I don't think in Uzbekistan and Kazakhstan it's the same situation. So we've got a lot of work to do. Groups like what Ryan's doing, we've got to educate people on the importance of mining all these minerals if we want the good things in our society that mining brings.
Absolutely.
Excellent. I gotta
Phil.
respect this guy, nuclear guy, you know? I mean, come on. I mean, I saw Jane Fonda's, China syndrome. I'm still can't sleep after that.
Which is unfortunately where a lot of people got their education on nuclear energy, was from an actress with
I know.
very
Well,
little
that's
education.
the problem, I mean, here, I hear from all these activists, we got to save the planet, green energy. What is the only major source of energy that doesn't permit greenhouse gases? It is nuclear
Uranium.
energy. And the technology, as you will agree, it's not like the old plants that are, the China syndrome is going to go down to China and ruin the whole world, And what set back China here was 3 Mile Island, right? Remember that? And everybody, we got to shut down. And we stopped, this country because of that problem. We shut down an entire industry. Ted Kennedy, remember Ted Kennedy? Oh my gosh. And I hate to use this joke, but it's a great one.
I know where you're going on this. It's a good
Thank
one.
you. More people died at Chappaquiddick than died at 3 Mile Island. I'm just saying, that's a bad joke. Terrible, but who made that joke? But it's historically true.
That's the truth.
But it set back an entire industry. Look at Germany. Did you know what Germany did? Because of an earthquake in Japan, they shut down 25 nuclear power plants over the last 2 years. That's great for the environment. They're going to replace it with wind and solar. How's that working for them? Russia was going to make up the difference with the pipeline. Okay? This is madness, people. Energy madness. This is what we're going through in this country. This gentleman is right. The United States is the cleanest producer of almost everything, okay? I mean, you need regulation, right? And, the U.S. can do everything better, whether it's oil, gas, uranium, lithium, even though we're not doing enough. Ms. Hirsch can tell you that. Mm-hmm. How many people saw Revenge of the Electric Car here? Anybody see that movie? Watch it. I can't believe these people. That's the greatest movie about you saw it? Yes, about the Chevy E1. And it was a story of, I don't want to ruin it for you, but there was 5 startup electric car companies. I felt sorry for this one guy. He bought a factory and it got shut down by the government because it has asbestos in it. But Elon Musk was there, and they had GE, right? And they were making fun of Elon Musk. Yeah, electric car. Here's Detroit. It took them how many years to come up with an electric car? They were working on it for what, 50 years, you know? And then Elon Musk comes in and does it in a few years. But I don't want to ruin the ending, but it ends with the financial crisis and all the guys from the big oil going in their private planes to Washington. Great ending. But anyway, you listen, you know, I absolutely think what everybody's talking about, I think our country is now going to learn. I think the Biden administration better learn.
I hope so.
One of the biggest setbacks we've had in this country is bad energy policy. Pie in the sky, unrealistic, bad energy policy. And it's not just here in the U.S. The Paris Climate Accord is a joke. The way it set back the global economy, to put at risk geopolitically, economically, it was stupid, okay? I'm sorry. And I'm all for saving the planet, reducing greenhouse gas emissions. She talked about China writing checks, but you know, the United States innovates. That's what we do, we just don't write checks. We innovate, but we don't take advantage of it the way that we should. Partly because of bad policy. You know, we've got to get away from the myths about energy, you know, and realistic, you know. How many people like wind power? I'd rather have nuclear, but you like wind? Okay, that's okay, cool. Do you know that that's not very environmental, you know? Did you know that? Yeah. The wind turbines, you know how long they... Yeah. No, that's true. You know, listen. Yeah. I know. They're not very pretty. You know, I mean, I used to go down by the Mississippi River. I don't want to talk too much to take up everybody's time. Down by the Mississippi, outside of the tri-state area, go through these rolling hills. It was just beautiful rolling hills. Now it's all wind turbines, you know. And then our wind turbines end up in a landfill in about 2 years, and they can't recycle them. Okay? Electric cars, you're break-even. You feel, I'm feeling good about the environment with my electric car. Do you know what the break-even is on an electric car to actually get a return on greenhouse gas emissions? I think you have to drive. The Wall Street Journal did a paper. I think you got to do about 25,000 miles before you get a break-even, you know. Now, if they can go 100,000 miles, then I think you really start to get a benefit. But then you don't, you know, you got to look at the strip mining for the lithium and the coal.
You don't strip mine for lithium.
Yeah. The which one now?
Your numbers are a bit old. So
The numbers are wrong?
Yeah, you definitely, so first of all, those break-even numbers depend very aggressively on what the power mix that you're charging your car on, right?
Correct.
So, but even in one of your worst case situations, I think it's about 6 months of ownership when you cross that, and then
Right.
for the rest of the life of the car, you continuously get much better in terms of the life cycle emissions of a greenhouse gas.
What about the charging over time? I mean, will we have to redo the entire power grid in this country?
I think you're going to need a lot more electricity for electrification writ large.
Right.
And I think in many areas, a greater infrastructure investment in your power lines and those types of things. But redo the entire infrastructure of the country, no.
What do you think would be the best source to power this new electrification? If you had to choose, what would be which way would you go in the United States? Where would you put the money?
It would depend where in the United States I was, right? So when you're looking at energy, it is a mix. And understanding it's kind of like a battery, right? There's no such thing as a best battery. There are better batteries for certain applications. And I mean, if I were able to do everything I wanted, big hydro, right? That's the easy answer there. But depending on where you are, what's going to work or what's going to be an efficient way to produce and transmit energy depends, right? You know, if you're in the Atacama Desert, great spot for solar. If you're in southern Argentina, great spot for wind, right? It doesn't make sense to put a bunch of solar panels in Oregon. But understanding how you're going to generate energy and then the best way to get it from A to B, it really is location dependent. So, you know, in the southeast, you know, you've got different challenges and different land availability, different solar availability, different. So I guess where do you want to
Yeah,
live?
do you ever-
Emily,
Yeah,
I'll
go
just
ahead.
add to that. I mean, Emily's bang on. I mean, it's not one size fits all.
Right.
Solar in Illinois is not the same as solar in Phoenix, Arizona, and wind in Iowa is obviously better than wind in Georgia. And so, you know, we're fortunate as Americans and Canadians. We're blessed with an abundance of energy sources. We're not like Japan or other countries that are resource poor. We are blessed with a mix of energy sources, and what we need to, the answer is we need to use the best, smartest mix of all those. And hey, guess what? Natural gas is part of that mix, but it's not the entire answer. Nuclear is not the entire answer. Renewables is not the answer. It's all of those in the best combination where they work best. I mean, gas is a great way to make electricity, folks. It's very dispatchable, and we have lots of natural gas. It's very volatile in terms of fuel costs, so, you know, if gas is expensive, it's not such a good way to make electricity. But this is where we take this mix of energy sources and we have an energy policy, which is something the country has kind of lacked. I mean, we're obviously going into this transitional green energy, but I'm fearful that we do dumb green energy instead of smart green energy. And smart green energy, believe it or not, there's a movement afoot by the conservative parties in Europe, in the European Union, that want to move towards that. And those policies, as long as the gas isn't coming from Russia, natural gas plays a part, nuclear plays a part. But if we don't do the math and science, we're going to fail. Like, we will have expensive electricity, unreliable electricity, our quality of life will impact, our economy will be impacted. So it's a real serious question, and I just hope our politicians are being serious in coming up with the answers.
I'm going to have one more round of questions from me, and then we're going to open it up to all of you. I think this is a great give and take because, you know, one of the things, and I was a big supporter, just a slightly partisan comment, of Donald Trump in 2016, not so much in 2020. I actually supported a woman for president in 2020, a libertarian candidate.
Yeah.
But
Good old Joe.
one of the things I would hope somebody in his inner circle, especially if he decides he is going to run in 24, who will do some forensic analysis of the last campaign, is that the greatest accomplishment and work done by the Trump administration, in my opinion, was what was done by Rick Perry and Dan Brouillette at the Energy Department. They did lay the groundwork for a good, market-driven, partly all of the above energy policy, which is now at best been suspended, and it's been made hash of because now we're not making energy policy based on economics and need and whatnot. We're making it based on you know, pie in the sky ideals, I think,
Ideology,
to a great
not-
extent.
yeah.
So, you know, on that subject, we still have to reckon with the fact, whatever flavor you think is the best, maybe one's better than the other, the fact is, in this world, the demand for energy never goes down. It goes up every year. Some years less than others if you've got an economic recession in the world and whatnot, but it goes up. And in this country, and this is a question I want to pose to each of you real quick. This country has just under 5% of the world's population. We consume 25% of the world's daily energy use, demand. There is no glutton on this planet like the U.S. economy. And I think some of the reason for pushback on all of these things, whether it's mining for critical metals, whether it's oil and gas, whatever it is because even though it's not always coming from an informed standpoint or viewpoint, a lot of citizens just have this idea, hey, we're just consuming too much. We do need to be sustainable. How do we marry the legitimate concerns people have over sustainability and pollution with what we need to accomplish, with the point we need to get to for future economy where we still do have all of the above, but where everything is more efficient? So, Emily, from the lithium/battery standpoint, How would you answer someone asking you that question or posing that concern to you?
Public transportation, living closer together. I mean, I think I politically diverge from you a lot on sort of my opinion on this, but I think that an interesting book to read is Happy City, is what it's called.
Is what it's called?
It's called Happy City. It's a sort of a history of the city worldwide, as well as the history of sort of suburban America. And it's an interesting fact that no matter where somebody is from in the world, one of the things that defines whether that person identifies as happy or not, or the leading cause of stress and unhappiness, is commute times and traffic. And so when you look at folks who define the American dream as, 2 to 3 cars per person being behind the wheel at all times, I mean, those rates of growth, I think we've reached a level of diminishing returns to the quality of life. And so I think that from a standpoint of more is better, and continued congestion and traffic and things like that, I think moving towards a shared vehicle type economy, one of the benefits of an electric vehicle is that the drivetrain and the ability of the car to respond quickly is much more sensitive, which means that a path towards more autonomous vehicles is within the horizon within a 20-year period. And I think that not possessing, every single human on Earth possessing a chunk of metal that sits unused most of the time and then, spends their life in traffic sad and alone is not really the way I'd like to nudge society.
I'll shock you. Have you ever heard of an outfit in Florida where I live called the Venus Project?
I haven't.
You need to look it up
I will.
because that goes even beyond, because I believe that this country, one of the ways we could be more sustainable is to have more public transportation.
Color me shocked, Chris.
What's that?
I said color me shocked.
Yeah. Ryan, people are pushing back against development in the Iron Range and elsewhere because, again, of these concerns over sustainability. How do we address that and still explain to people why we do things that need to be done in the Iron Range and elsewhere?
Well, it's pretty simple. So historically, northeastern Minnesota is politically aligned with a party called the DFL Party, which is called the Democratic Farmer Labor Party in northern Minnesota. And it's been that way for 100 plus years. And part of that is because they have a strong union building trade presence. And so historically, you look at the area, and then you look even in Duluth, it's even more heavily Democrat, which is fine. But many of these people, they want a renewable energy future. They want EV batteries. They want more electric vehicles. But many of those same folks, and this is kind of what, just as a little bit of a background, like, the union building trades are having a tough time grasping with, because a lot of times they're endorsing Democratic candidates, is that many of those Democrats, or whether they're candidates or whether they're citizens, are also against the very mining projects in northeastern Minnesota, like a Twin Metals Minnesota or a Talon Metals or Polymet's NorthMet project. They're against the very projects that would access the minerals and metals needed to develop an electric vehicle. So like one example being Twin Metals Minnesota at Ely. You look at the Biden administration, they are consistently and constantly pushing for more electric vehicles and more renewable energy technologies, but they canceled and pulled the leases away from a project that would support the production of over 280,000 electric vehicles annually. And you're seeing this across the country. You're seeing with Trilogy Metals in Alaska, by them, I think they remanded one specific permit for a road that was being federally built. I'm not too familiar with that project, but you look at these little signs all across the country, whether they're projects in Arizona or projects in Idaho or up in northern Minnesota, they say one thing, but then they do another. They're not connecting the dots for the people that voted for them. And so especially with Iron Range, it's extremely frustrating because we've been mining iron ore for over 130 years. And we're trying to prove that we can do the same thing with copper and nickel. So with iron ore, we've been mining it safely and responsibly for over 130 years, but we believe we can do the same with copper and nickel. And for a renewable energy future, if we want to get serious about domestic production of critical minerals, it's going to start in Minnesota, especially with nickel. Northern Minnesota holds 95% of the U.S. nickel reserves. The other 5% is in the Upper Peninsula of Michigan, which is currently being mined by a mine called Eagle Mine. They're going to be running out of ore by 2026 or 2027. So when that time comes, Minnesota is literally the U.S.'s last stand when it comes to having a reliable nickel supply of nickel. You look at our cobalt supply, we're 70% of our cobalt we're buying from the Democratic Republic of Congo. Over 25,000 children are currently employed in the production of mining cobalt in Congo. Minnesota has 88% of the U.S. cobalt reserves. You look at the copper reserves. Northern Minnesota holds 34% of U.S. copper reserves and over 75% of our platinum group metals like palladium. So when we look across the country and we see our administration consistently pushing for a renewable energy future, whether you agree with these technologies or not, you're going to have to give them from Minnesota, especially with nickel. And I'm just seeing that problem again. I just can't stress this enough, across the country where they're not connecting the dots, and unfortunately, it's coming mainly from one side of the aisle politically, which is tough to kind of explain to folks that are against it. You know, I mean, when I'm talking to someone that's against twin metals or they're against polymet, ironically, they love talking about Tesla. They love talking about wind turbines, but then they forget about the fact that a wind turbine on average has 4.7 tons of copper in it. I mean, every time I drive through North Dakota or certain parts of Minnesota or Iowa, when you see all the wind farms, the first thing I'm thinking of is how many tons of copper is that as I'm driving through. Yeah, exactly. Yeah, there you go. That is oil. And, and then you look at electric vehicles. The average electric vehicle has 195 pounds of copper. So many of the folks that are very against mining projects, and they call themselves environmentalists, I would argue are some of the biggest enemies to the environment itself. One stat that I always like to say too is that, obviously the Iron Range takes a lot of pride in producing iron ore. Which is, we're usually, obviously selling that to make steel. Well, steel produced in China emits 2.5 times more CO2 greenhouse gas emissions than steel produced here in the U.S. Well, you could apply that to any other minerals in the U.S., whether it's with copper, whether it's nickel. So just trying to explain that the more that you stop these projects, the more that you are actually hurting the environment from a global perspective. And so I'm kind of repeating myself when I say this, but the environmentalists that are against the mining projects here in the U.S., I would argue, are probably the biggest hindrance to the environment itself as a whole globally. They're hurting the environment, and they're offshoring demand to countries that don't have the same labor or environmental regulations as we do.
Very true. I'm going to inject something here real quick. Who remembers the movie from years ago with Leonardo DiCaprio called Blood Diamond?
I do.
A lot of people do. Very popular movie. That started something which all of us in our respective ways really need to push further along with Ryan's point. And it highlighted the fact that a lot of diamonds sold in the world come from conflict zones. They're produced in places under bad conditions, sometimes under criminally bad to the point of death conditions. And the world decided, no, we're not going to support that anymore. So among other things, a process was created called the Kimberley Process. Who's ever heard of that? Michael has. In British Columbia, named for Kimberley, British Columbia, and literally, and this might not be the best technical description, but for lack of a better one, a small microscopic laser tattoo is put on a diamond mined in Canada, which is why for a lot of years since then, diamonds that have that certification as being from Canada sell at a premium, because people who want to be politically correct, conscious, whatever you want to say, decided we do not want to support these illicit industries. Well, then you went to Apple and Samsung and Toshiba and some of these companies that make phones and tablets and computers. And guess what? They started to become under pressure. Where do you get the 30-some minerals that are in your phone? And I had a little dinner gathering with some friends about a year ago, and a relatively new friend of mine, he's looking up my website on his phone. Oh, that's interesting, that's interesting. Well, wait a minute, you got extractive industries here? I don't know if I like that. I said, well, then do the right thing, take your phone and take it to the recycling place immediately, along with your car, along with your TV, and along with your computer. Okay, and he figured out, okay, I guess I am a little bit of a hypocrite. So the next step is exactly what Ryan was pointing out, that why is it correct for us here in America to not, well, you don't want to see how the sausage is made. In my green issue that I did months ago, I show a picture of Greta Thunberg, whose sincerity I would never question. I would question the sincerity of people parading her in front of the cameras, which is a different story. But she's got her trademark scowl on her face saying, "You've stolen my childhood." And then the next picture is some of those little children in the Congo up to their chest in water and mud and chemicals, one with a scowl on his face saying, "Gee, I'm all broken up about that." Okay. So we do need to go from diamonds to smartphones to now cars and get people to understand the very same thing. Don't be a hypocrite where your car is concerned. You figured it out with diamonds, you figured it out with your smartphone. Everybody got on Apple's board and Samsung's board to make sure that these metals come from the right places. We need to do it with the rest of this industry too. I'm going to shift gears a little bit just because of time with my follow-up questions to Scott and to Phil. Scott, you talked about this during your UEC presentation, but I'd like you to repeat where you see, because again, as we said a minute ago, the uranium picture is less bad than a lot of these other things right now. People are starting to get it. What is it going to take for the funding to be released to start to support the domestic uranium industry again?
Well, market conditions. We're at the end of the day, we're capitalists, and oftentimes I think we always look to government for, okay, what can the government do? Like, well, I would rather rely on free markets, and we're seeing that now with uranium price, trading in the $55, $60 a pound. Still at a level that's not going to see an avalanche of uranium being produced and coming into the market, but it's getting to a point where it can support production in the United States, in Saskatchewan, Canada. So, funding will come. I mean, we're getting big institutional investor interest, generalist investors on the retail and institutional side coming into the uranium space. The whole thought of nuclear power as a green, sustainable energy. I mean, think of all these ESG green bond funds that have, probably $1 trillion to spend on green energy projects. And they've told us, these managers, these multi-billion-dollar funds are saying, how many more shares of Vestas Wind Power or Solar City can I invest in? I already have huge positions. So now they have the ability to invest in small modular nuclear reactor companies, or the fuel cycle, the uranium that goes in that. And so I'm not worried about the funding coming. If we've got a good story and we can produce uranium and compete on a global basis, that's fine. Now, there are, as we said, government things that they can get out of our way with. I think the Biden administration is trying to renew the NEPA process and make it harder to license and permit new projects. Well, that's not helpful if you're trying to get us, with critical and strategic minerals, energy minerals in the United States. You want more of it in competition with China and Russia, putting more and more regulation on projects which are already fully adequately regulated in the United States is not helpful. So, we need to, ensure that government gets out of our way, provides, I think a useful step would be the Strategic Uranium Reserve. What a great stimulus for uranium production to get kickstarted in the United States. It's not just money that goes out. These are taxpayer dollars, and in exchange you get a stockpile of U.S. unobligated origin uranium from U.S. mines, which can not only help utilities at times like this when there's a supply crunch with Russia, Ukraine, but it also backstops our nuclear navy. We have 104 reactors and 84 submarines and aircraft carriers that run on U.S. origin uranium. So a Strategic Uranium Reserve just bolsters that program as well. So I'm confident that the industry will get the funding, but again, markets have to be the driver, in my opinion, and they're coming together.
Good. Phil, the Biden administration recently has been browbeating oil and gas producers, saying you're not producing enough, after telling them exactly the opposite. And as I pointed out with Secretary Yellen, just one example, hindering the industry. So the oil and gas companies, a lot of them have said, hey, all right, well, it's too much trouble and it's unpopular to add to our production capacity, so we're going to pay bigger dividends to our shareholders and buy back stock, and let's see how you like it. So how is this, because we know that at least until all these other things come together, we need to continue to be a big producer of oil and natural gas. Consumption demand has not waned. And how do we get to a place where we're going to have a proper market-driven equilibrium, not the administration saying one thing today, another thing tomorrow? What is it going to take for these oil and gas companies, for as long as we still need them to do it, to be willing again to increase production?
I think I want to quote our Energy Secretary, Jennifer Granholm, when asked what we could do to raise U.S. oil and gas production. Okay, you ready? I quote.
Yeah. I remember that.
I don't know if I did that right, but, you know, thank you. That's her energy secretary. She's not an energy secretary. She's a green energy advocate and danced in a green energy video. We don't have any leadership at the Department of Energy. You want to know how many petroleum people they have in the Energy Department that work in the administration? 0. The oil and gas people have been ostracized by this administration. They don't have a seat at the table. And now they're blaming them for not raising production. And what did the Biden administration do when they got into a jam in Europe? You know, they have an energy shortage because of bad energy policy, so they're looking to the U.S. oil and gas industry to save them, right? Well, I promise you, we're going to send every molecule of natural gas we can export to Europe. China's really bummed out because they were supposed to get some of that, you know? And it's like, I don't see us sending them biofuels. They're not asking us for wind turbines right now. They're not asking us for electric cars. They need to keep the lights on, you know? And what was that, Chris, you gave me that, what is it? The United States has what % of the population and uses what % of the energy?
Well, we have just under 5% of the world's population, but we use 25% of the energy.
Wear that with pride. You know, they wanted us to feel guilty about that in the world. That's why we got in the Paris Climate. You guys are using all the energy. You know what? We use it more efficiently than any place else in the world. We get more economic bang for our buck, and the positive economic development that we develop around the world because of the energy that we consume is amazing. You know, I mean, I don't know what energy is, oil and gas or energy. It's about 8% of our gross domestic product. I mean, it powers our lives. You know, powers the economy. And yeah, you know, they're in an era where we've got to go through a transition. That's understood. But the fear-mongering that we've seen from places like the International Energy Agency, that basically told in their own report, hey, we lied to people about how bad things were, but we did it for a good cause because we want to call to people to action, right? Congress 25 years ago, or was it maybe now, but Wall Street Journal, you can look it up, talk about the impact of climate change. And this is a list of what's going to happen, you know, we think is highly probable is going to happen in the next 25 years on energy if we don't act now, right? You want to know how many things of those came true? 0. Because we're being driven by, you know, how dare you kind of policies as opposed to science. The energy transition has not been driven by science. It's been driven by fear, okay? There's a book that was written by Michael Crichton years ago, he's passed away, called, what was the name of it? It's about the green energy, you know, and the way that, you know, climate data is put together and the worst case scenarios. And, and they say, well, all scientists agree. They really don't. They can't speak out because if you speak out, you know, you have a difference of opinion, you're ostracized these days. You know, you get canceled if you question climate science. You can't question it, okay? Because if you do, you're evil. I believe the best way to get to the solution is to question everything, right, when it comes to science. That's what science is, right? Science isn't, I've got a computer model that shows this, the world's going to end, you can't question it. Actually, though, it's too late. Remember the last United Nations conference? They said if they didn't do it, it was their last chance to save the world. Well, they didn't do it, so we're doomed, right? It's over. So why are we going on? It's ridiculous. You know, we need to understand that we need an everything and above. And I think everybody on this panel agrees the problem is short-sighted, driven bad regulation from the government. That's what has to change. We have to get off of this, you know, craziness. I mean, the Paris Climate Accord, you know how many degrees was that supposed to save the world by? Not enough to save the world. What it was supposed to do is penalize the United States for being, you know, using more energy and subsidize places like China where they use energy in a bad way, or developing countries. I'm all for helping developing countries, but there's better ways to do it, right? And so, and listen, I believe that there's going to be a big energy transition, but in the meantime, I see a super cycle in these commodities. Yeah. I think everybody understands we haven't invested enough in it. We took, you know, you have shale, the shale revolution, by the way. I don't know how much time, I don't want to take everybody's time, but shale revolution was one of the most revolutionary things that happened in the world. I mean, they changed everything. You know, we were at peak, oh, the world's running out of oil. I never believed that, but, you know, I always believed that the markets would work it out. High prices cure high prices. They said, you know, we can't drill our way to energy prosperity. We can't do it. Quit drilling, give up. We're doomed. We have to kiss OPEC's shoe, you know. That's the only way we can do it. Wrong. Technology in the United States did it. Guy by the name of George Mitchell invested money. He failed. Invested more money. He failed again. But then he unlocked the mystery to the shale revolution. And that changed the world. Now we're exporting liquefied natural gas. You know what our Treasury Secretary, Alan Greenspan used to say? The biggest threat to the United States economy in the next generation is our inability to produce natural gas. Did you know that? So we were building these terminals that we're now using to export natural gas to Europe, to import. Because our economy, Canada, our good friends in Canada, you're not Canadian, are you? Okay, I'm sorry. Our Canadians, they said they were going to cut us off. They said, you know what, we like you guys, you know, you're good. We beat you in hockey, we got the gold medal. But if you guys have if we have a cold winter, we're going to cut you guys off. It's Canada first energy policy. You know, that's what they said a few years ago. The world changed that over the last couple of years. So I guess what I'm getting at is, the solutions, you know, these government panels where they go to fancy dinners in Glasgow, Scotland, or they go to wherever they go and have the fancy dinners and look to save the planet and get paid off by Big Green and all these, you know, all these money people, you know, that's not the answer. It's innovation, get out of the way. You know, you need regulation, you need oversight, you need clean energy, but regulation is killing this country and killing the world. And I think the war in Ukraine is a big, Vladimir Putin was planning this for generations, you know? It's like, hey, you know, these guys are going to be dependent on me. I can do whatever I want, and they can't do anything about it because I can turn off their lights, right? And he's threatened that and along with nuclear annihilation, right? Nothing like to bring NATO together like the threat of nuclear war, right? They're all getting along now. Hey, why? Because they get wiped off the face of the earth in 2 minutes, or their lights can go off. You know, and right now the biggest debate in the energy world is whether Europe can get off of the supply. Germany doesn't think they can do it. They're talking about maybe 6 months or a year, but even with all the terrible things that we're seeing in Ukraine, they're still sending them billions and billions of dollars every day.
Yeah,
checks every day.
It hits close to home in nuclear fuel. You know, in the United States, we're 50% reliant on Russia, Kazakhstan, Uzbekistan for uranium. It's $1.3 billion a year. It's not as big as the oil and gas, but why are we sending $1 to Putin with what's going on? I mean, when they start bombing, children's hospitals and carpet bombing entire, housing blocks and reckless behavior around the nuclear power plants, I would have thought that utilities would have just stood up and said, no, enough. Some have. Vattenfall in Sweden, southern companies in Georgia and Alabama have said, we're not buying Russian uranium. But others, a very large utility here in Illinois, doesn't want to take that step and wants to kind of see how things shake out because they like cheap uranium that comes from Russia that's been, subsidized by state-owned entities and undercut Western suppliers. So even in the U.S., we're like, we have bills before Congress. Senator Barrasso wants imports of Russian uranium banned, just like we did with coal, oil, and gas immediately. Yet others are saying, no, let's do it over 3 years. 3 years, you could have every man, woman, and child in Ukraine dead by that time. So it is amazing that reputationally, utilities haven't been able to, but I guess in Germany's case too, they put themselves in an untenable position where they can't live without the Russian gas. So, we told them, we warned them.
They were warned, yeah.
All right, we're going to move on to some questions from the audience. Eric is going to be manned with the microphone. So, right behind you, Eric.
Okay, regarding platinum metal group, metals, specifically platinum and palladium, not so much rhodium. I've wondered, of course I've heard and read that as we go further into electrification, the usage, and demand will go up. But the biggest use of platinum, specifically palladium, as of right now in the internal combustion engine is in diesel-powered cars, mainly manufactured and used in Europe. So if that demand is going to fall off, obviously, as we transition into electrification, is the panel or the panelists of the opinion that there will still be increased demand for PMG, minus the current catalytic converter usage that we have?
I'll take that. When you look at sort of the metal intensity of electric vehicles, and also the metal intensity of the transition to essentially the electrification of what's currently covered by fossil fuels, platinum and palladium are definitely the losers on that one. That said, I don't know if that's strong enough to say you will see demand go down. But from the electrification narrative, that's kind of the only metal that isn't 100, 200, 300, 500% increase over a certain number of years.
Ryan, do you have anything from that standpoint based on the base metals projects with the platinum group metals up in Minnesota?
Not much really. Actually, it was more to ask Emily a question just to make sure, because as much as I will talk about platinum group metals, I don't really research too much on what the uses are. But I think to kind of answer the question, from what I understand with palladium, it's a big use in our computers and a lot of our technology and with our cell phones. And I wanted to make sure I was
again, I'm not an expert on that,
Yeah.
but I do know that that is sort of the only metal that's the only metal that you see less demand for in an electrification scenario. But that said,
I think the demand is going to still increase,
Right.
Just because it's somewhat of a rare resource, and I think especially too, as you see, the world, many
I
third
think
world
there's
countries.
medical technology that is a driver as well for platinum group metals.
I would think so, but I also think too with with more and more countries industrializing themselves and using technology. There are many people in third world countries that are attaining cell phones. So I think, as long as that's going on, and we see countries, having more and more technologies, I think the demand, to answer your question, for palladium is still going to rise, even if they might decrease in other areas.
Yeah, we trade palladium on the futures market. I
Yeah,
think the
you probably know
margin's
that,
like
yeah.
60 grand right now per contract.
See, I didn't even know that.
Yeah.
And during the invasion, because I think Russia's one of the biggest producers, am I right?
Yep.
And I mean, the price of palladium and platinum is but now it's kind of crashed down a little bit. It's been kind of consolidating. But I think the future, they're both very rare metals. They're both going to have a lot of industrial uses. I think even with electric cars, they do, not as much.
No,
Okay.
he's hit the nail on the head. It's
You think
the
it's gonna be
catalytic
declining
converter.
demand?
Because it's the piece that you don't use.
The catalytic converters?
I believe so.
Yeah.
There's a
Catalytic
good
converters.
World Bank
Right.
report
That's-
that kind of breaks it all.
Right.
That's correct.
Yeah,
catalytic
the other thing to keep in mind where the platinum group metals are more disproportionately used is in hydrogen-powered vehicles. And the belief is that electric vehicles are going to be our own everyday vehicles perhaps, but hydrogen will be more
Right.
of use for mass transit and for
Right.
things like that. And so that's where your demand is still going to be there from those groups. I know that earlier today when we had the Clean Air Metals presentation, Abe Drost, he had a couple slides and he talked about that is going to be one of the drivers for platinum and palladium going forward will be the hydrogen, not electrification per se directly, but the hydrogen component of that. Rob?
Yeah, so another driver of platinum and palladium use, the biggest is autocatalytic converters, but the second is jewelry. So if you have white gold, up until recent years as platinum, but palladium's being used more and more. Rhodium was used in jewelry as well for a while until it got really, really expensive. I know a few years ago I bought a ring for my wife that was it was a Vera Wang that was done in rhodium, and then the price just shot up, and so they stopped using it. But anything that's like a white gold appearance is going to have platinum and palladium in it. Palladium is a little bit stronger and a little bit harder than platinum, so that's kind of the metal du jour. But that evens out depending on how much the prices rise and fall for platinum and palladium. Then I had a comment about the electric vehicle revolution. One of the speed bumps to that could be silver, because if you look at the amount of electric vehicle production that most of the world governments already have in their legislation or pending in their legislation, it would bankrupt the silver industry in a matter of a few years. There's not enough silver in the world to have an EV revolution as it currently stands. So that would require the price of silver probably to go up by 6 to 7 times, and for a lot of new exploration to come on board. So people, if you believe in the EV revolution, which I think is coming, you want to invest in silver.
Gotcha. That's a good point. I think Elon Musk agrees with you. I think he said the same thing. Yeah.
Should have just been up here for the palladium part.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Right.
What's that?
Right.
I know how much nickel and copper are in a Tesla, but not on silver actually. So Rob,
Yeah.
Rob probably knows.
Yeah. Well, it's
Oh,
weird.
yeah,
The
no.
silver prices haven't really, I thought they'd be doing better lately. The precious metals, both gold and silver, have just been struggling right now. They really haven't been doing much. I mean, we did see gold get over $2,000 an ounce, but I think it's back around 1,800. And silver
Thought it'd be more
technically
by
just
now.
can't seem to get going these days. So.
Not yet.
Yeah,
Sir?
It was just a couple of comments. I was either yesterday or the day before, I was listening to a podcast by Wealthion, and they had Doomberg on there. And Doomberg actually talked about not Russia, but Germany and also Great Britain has underground natural gas reserves. But I guess they have the same issue, not in my backyard, so they create their own problem.
Yeah, Poland has huge gas reserves,
Ye-
and they just haven't been, the sort of whole anti-drilling, anti-fracking movement kind of has kept the gas in the ground. So
Right.
I think there'll
It's
be a
too
big
bad.
movement to tap those resources that aren't coming from Russia.
Yeah.
Back to what Scott alluded to earlier as well, and Phil mentioned this too, where Germany's concerned. Germany decided under the recently departed Chancellor Merkel that they wanted to get rid of all of their nuclear production. So what did they do? They bought nuclear energy from France,
Right.
which gets 3/4 of its power grid fired by nuclear energy. I think proportionally more than any country in the world,
Yeah.
isn't it?
I think
Which
that's
is
the only thing they've ever
surprising.
done
And
right.
so Germany's burning more coal,
Yeah.
which they were supposed to get away from. So
Yeah,
it's-
that's the irony is no one's holier than thou than the Germans when it comes to the green energy transition. And they've been doing it for 15 years. We've had COP 29, like they've been going to these COP 20 meetings for 29 years
Yeah.
and nothing to show for it. Well, if Germany can spend hundreds of billions of euros on renewables and not get it done, well, what hope is there for India or China? And that's why nuclear really needs, their mistake was moving away from nuclear. They could have been, they could have done it differently and not be
Yeah.
relying on Russia today, but it was
Yeah.
really a self-inflicted wound.
Absolutely.
The European Union has a policy already in writing that by 2030, they will get at least 50% of their lithium needs met within the European Union.
Wow.
They get 0% of them there now. One company not represented here today is European Minerals. They have a huge lithium project in the Czech Republic, some other metals as well. An equal partner of the project is the Czech Republic State Utility, and God only knows when that thing is going to get up and running to provide the lithium that they need. Keith Phillips earlier from Piedmont was talking about, there's all kinds of different science, and this is all still a moving target for some of these metals. Can you replace nickel with iron for shorter distances, or with this or that or the other thing? You can't replace lithium anywhere in the mix, am I right?
You're right.
Yeah. So, I fear that because, and you spoke to this at the outset, Emily, that when we have no set policy, no cost certainty, when it comes to the point of financing the Piedmonts and the Frontiers and the rest of them, is an investment banker going to feel good about things when the policy is a muddle,
Yeah.
and when 1 minute it's 90,000 a ton,
Yeah.
then it's down to 20,000, it's up to 50,000? Who
Right.
wants to finance that?
Well, and the other thing too that the Securities and Exchange Commission is doing right now is making every company figure out what their carbon footprint is
Right.
all the way down the line. Can you imagine, and we're talking about all these supply chain issues and all the regulatory issues. I mean, that's going to make everything almost unmanageable, and it's going to
Well-
make things
No,
so
life cycle
expensive.
life cycle assessments are, I'm of the opinion, make permitting more simple, keep the government doing its job, which is establishing political stability and a stable regulatory environment. But having companies report a life cycle assessment is a very powerful tool against greenwashing, in the sense that rather than a company coming out and saying, I make wind turbines, therefore I am green, it says, right, you have to do essentially a scientific analysis of the different
Right.
steps of your process. And
Right.
not only do you have to do that, here's a tool by which one company is comparable to another.
Right.
A life cycle assessment's not a challenge to undertake, even at an early stage. You just get a different level of security or a different level of certainty around that.
I just, it's just, so far the government hasn't been able to regulate any of this correctly. And this life cycle assessment, I mean, look at what's happened in Germany, perfect example. I mean, because of the green energy transition, they're burning dirtier fuels than they have in 25 years. I mean, it's crazy, and, all in the good name of doing things. And there's going to be some companies that have such a complicated supply chain. Now, there is a way to do it, I think. I mean,
Life
but I
cycle
don't think it's the
assessment.
government. I think you have to have,
Well, it's not so much the government as enforcing it, but it's one of the things that in the green revolution, I think that a lot of folks on this panel have talked about some of the hypocrisy inherent in that. But one of the challenges for, I would say, both investors trying to invest in or put their money where their mouth is, turn down their own hypocrisy a little bit, or on the other side, governments or people trying to assess companies, is that one wind company will say, look how green I am, and here's a list of how green I am, and another company will give a different list. And when you're trying to compare and contrast, you get to a situation where you've got a company or the German government saying, look how green we are.
Right.
But if they had to do a life cycle assessment and have to put a metric on that, metrics are only useful when you can compare two things between each other, or to say, okay, this company was here today and it's going here tomorrow. But I think I'm a very much in favor of metrics-based reporting, and life cycle assessments are, in my opinion, the only way that you can take two projects and compare them and say, right, better in our backyard, see what you're doing to Indonesia, and to go beyond, you know, a sad story or a troubling photo, is to say, right, this is, you know, this is the differences. You can feel better as a consumer, or you can feel better as an investor putting your money behind this process.
Well, I'll comment that because, like, as an executive of a mining company that has had to adopt ESG principles and you know, run with it, is I was skeptical at first. I was in your camp. I'm like, oh, this is a bunch of hooey, like, you know, what is this? It's just going to increase our costs and everything else. But then I went to ESG school. So I went to training and I learned about what it was, what it is, what it isn't. And I've embraced it. Why have I embraced it? Because I think if you're good at it, it can be a competitive advantage, and you can, you know, appeal more to your customer that cares about ESG and ethical mining and practices over somebody who doesn't. In the investment community, capital, it'll lower your cost of capital. So it's not easy. I mean, listen, I'm working through, I worked with Emily's Carrasco Mines Pain Institute to work with bringing big mining companies like Newmont, Rio Tinto, together with the nuclear energy industry to try to meet their ESG goals for energy production at mines. I mean, imagine a big conventional mine cannot run on a solar panel or a windmill. I mean, they got to have 24/7 uninterruptible power. And so we're working with them on small micro reactors and small modular reactors as a way to get to carbon free by 2050, because as it stands today, Newmont and companies like that have made commitments that they don't currently have the technology to solve today. They're relying on industries like ours to come up with those solutions. But it is a massive transition, and it won't come without cost.
Would you consider like a reporting system, a platform would that be easier to do, or how would you implement
Emily's bang on, like, metrics is the right way, but there are kind of several competing platforms, and it's kind of a one-size-fits-all, like, you know, you might be measured on, well, what about your relationships with tribal communities?
Right.
Well, if you don't have tribal communities in your area, you get a 0 score because you don't have a tribal relations policy. And those sort of things, those are details that need to...
I think it's actually quite interesting that ESG has all been lumped together, because when you're talking about environmental and sustainable characteristics, you're talking about hard science. You're talking about measurable, quantifiable metrics. Whereas when it comes to governance and relationships with communities and things like that, those are equally important, but I think soft components. And as a professional, I don't think they belong in the same basket.
No, and I agree. And to move on and to wrap that point up, Emily, I think that what happened is just like the whole concept to begin with of we want a green economy. So you throw that concept out there, and people with little real-world experience in much of anything that matters get to define what that is. And it's abstract, it's gray, and it's why we're confused. Same thing with ESG. Every company on the planet is coming out, oh, here's our ESG bona fides, here's our ESG bona fides. Why? Because that's what investors want to hear. Is it on the level? Not always. You know, she made the point of greenwashing. There's all kinds of that going on. But here again, you've had this ESG concept thrown out there. This is what we all aspire to. Well, let's get people that know what they're doing, not politicians, but let's do what Reagan did, for better or worse, you know, never went anywhere, but with the Grace Commission. Let's get people in industry, smart environmentalists, people that are about sustainability, but also get the oil and gas industry back to the table and all these other moving parts, and sit down, tell the politicians, stay the hell out of our way, let us do our job, and come up with a way to define these things. I think we can all agree on that. Ryan, were you wanting to interject something before you take another question?
Well, I wanted to make sure I was correct in saying this, Scott. Can't one small modular nuclear reactor run a mine, like a normal sized mine?
I mean, you know, a reactor on a submarine or aircraft carrier that's operated safely since the 1950s can surely be sited on land and power, either if you're in the Carlin Belt of Nevada, where there's several mines in the proximity, or up in northern Ontario, northern Quebec. Some of the most expensive electricity in the world is diesel-fired electricity that powers northern communities and northern mines. So if you can come in with 24/7 uninterruptible power that comes in much cheaper than that, where these small modular reactors can, and they can be as small as 3, 4, 5 megawatts, or they can be 10 or 50 megawatts. It's definitely, it's a growth industry. Companies like Ultra-Safe Nuclear out of Chalk River in Canada are moving forward on it. But it doesn't have to be mining. It can be industrial users. It can be producers of hydrogen can use nuclear power and the heat and steam from that to produce hydrogen. Hell, there's utilities in the U.S. that are producing green bitcoins by mining bitcoins next to a nuclear power plant and claiming the green energy credit. These are kind of the innovative things where
it's actually green
suddenly,
energy.
yeah, instead of nuclear power being discounted, it's going to be a premium because of its baseload green energy.
Next question.
I'd like to connect together the electrification of the U.S. with small reactors. My research showed, research I did from other people showed that it's about $1 trillion to upgrade our grid if we really want to go with electric vehicles and those types of solutions. But the small reactors solve a lot of that problem because you don't have to put so much money into long transmission lines. So that's such an important technology, and I think it's not being recognized nearly as much as it needs to. If you're going to do electrification in America, that's the only way that I can see to provide the energy without spending trillions on the infrastructure.
Yeah, I
Just
mean,
use those free green bitcoins.
Well, to the points earlier too, to kind of put it in perspective, there's 7 existing iron mining sites. I believe it's 7, don't quote me on it right now, but 7 existing iron mining sites in northeastern Minnesota, and the power that they use is the equivalent to the whole population of Minneapolis, Minnesota. That's how much power it uses. So when Scott says that you can power a mine off of a small modular nuclear reactor, that really, I think, paints a picture of how efficient it is, personally, I
Yep.
think.
Yeah.
yeah, no, it's huge. Industrial applications, petrochemical plants, anyone who's a big consumer of energy and can't run on a windmill or a solar panel, if they're going to go carbon-free or major carbon reductions
yeah.
by 2030, 2050, they're going to have to take these steps, and I think that's a real growth. Listen, I work with Colorado School of Mines and the nuclear engineering department. I tell young people that are 21 years old coming out of school, I advise them, get into small modular and micro reactors, and you will have an incredible industry. Young people today are really gravitating towards that because not only do they want to be invigorated professionally in an engineering capacity, but they also want to make a difference in the world. And they see this as a way to deliver clean energy, green energy, and using technology to get there. So it's an exciting market. Island applications, how would Puerto Rico benefit? They barely deliver electricity there with everything that's been going on. There's multiple applications. U.S. military is developing the Project Pele that are developing microreactors for remote military bases. So huge growth industry.
Next question. Mike Paul.
Yeah, I had some points maybe Phil can comment on. If you could give people an idea of the oil production landscape in the United States. Supposedly 10% of the U.S. oil production is produced by the major oil companies like Exxon, Shell, Chevron, and Marathon. And then the rest is produced by independent producers being defined as 12 employees or less. So those independents are producing 90% of U.S. oil production.
Correct.
If you could comment on that. And then some of the major oil producers are pushing the green energy narrative for their own image improvement, but at the same time, they're benefiting from the increase in oil price. So if you could comment on that. I'm not trying to push
No,
conspiracy, but it's just a fact that they're, they could push the energy, the green narrative, but at the same time, they benefit. And could you also comment on the U.S. relationship with OPEC? Has that changed, and what do you see in the future?
Absolutely. Well, first I want to comment about the nuclear powers doing the electric cars. I think that's awesome, by the way, the nuclear powers, because I did see a picture of an electric power plant. It was being powered, you charge your car, a car charging station powered by a diesel generator. So I think that defeated the purpose. But you're absolutely right. The small energy producers are the heart and soul of U.S. energy production, and they are under attack. I did talk to one energy producer, small producer, I don't know, maybe 100 barrels a day, maybe less. And he was saying that there are going to be some new regulations by the Biden administration as far as methane that could shut down a big percentage of U.S. production if they go through. Because the small guys, Shell and Chevron, the bigger producer, ExxonMobil, they can afford this, but the little ones won't be able to. So they're going to have to make a decision as to whether they want to put a big percentage of the U.S. energy oil producers out of business. Maybe the big guys will take over. Big oil might get bigger. That's generally what happens during these cycles. I do think, I'm not a stockbroker, but I do think energy, oil stocks, Chevron, Warren Buffett is a stock guy. He's getting very long Oxy, Chevron. So I do think it's a huge opportunity from that viewpoint. As far as the relationship with OPEC, I mean, nobody likes to deal with OPEC, okay? Nobody likes Saudi Arabia, nobody does. But from a historical viewpoint, I think the Biden administration's relationship with Saudi Arabia was clumsy, poorly thought out. The reason why, of course, is, President Biden came in on the campaign trail and said, we want to make Saudi Arabia a pariah state. Why? Because the guy who's the de facto leader of the country is a guy by the name of Crown Prince bin Salman, and he had a critic of his, or the Saudi ruling family. He was an American journalist. He was Saudi-born. He went back to Saudi Arabia to get married, get his marriage license, and he was murdered, okay, cut up into little pieces. And, of course, President Biden says, well, we're not going to deal with them. But obviously, in the crazy world that we live in, sometimes we have to deal with crazy people, right? And the relationship between that mistake of treating, he wouldn't even speak to President Biden, President Biden wouldn't speak to Crown Prince bin Salman, okay, at all. But then, of course, when push came to shove, historically over the last 20 years, when the United States needed oil, like during the war in Iraq, Saudi Arabia would have our back, right? Despite the politics at the end of the day. I think this is probably the first time, probably since the Arab oil embargo, where Saudi Arabia refused to raise oil production when the United States asked them to. President Trump, when he was president, I used to say, you can't tweet more oil out of the ground, but son of a gun, he could, He tweeted, those Saudis, we're sending them millions of dollars. We got millions of troops defending them. They wouldn't even be a freaking country, if they'd better pump oil. And sure enough, they started to pump oil. They're not even taking President Biden's phone calls right now, And that's how bad the relationship is. But from a geopolitical money viewpoint, the Biden administration is trying to backtrack. They're trying to get back in there because it's an important relationship. We don't like everything Saudi Arabia does. We don't like them as a country, but they're a necessary evil in the geopolitical thing of oil and gas. And because of that bad relationship, that's one of the reasons why we're releasing oil from the strategic reserve right now, which is also a bad move. The Biden administration has totally misused the oil industry, and it's kind of crazy because he first of all, he did it for political purposes in November, right? Because gas prices are too high. It wasn't about the war in Ukraine. He decided to release oil from the reserve. The main reason he did that is because he asked Saudi Arabia to do it, and they wouldn't do it. And he was like, we're going to teach you a lesson. We're going to release oil from the reserve, and that's going to solve everything. Well, the price of oil back then was $60. Now it's 100. How'd that work for him, right? I could tell Saudi Arabia was really shaking in their boots. Because when you release oil for the reserve to try to control prices, it's like trying to fight a wildfire with a squirt gun. It isn't going to work. You don't have enough oil in there, okay? Yeah. It's therefore a disruption of supply. So that's why the relationship is bad. And now, interestingly enough, when President Trump, when oil prices were zero, he's like, I want to buy more oil from the reserve, man. This is like cheap. The price of oil, he went to Congress and he said, hey, I want to buy oil. This is cheap. We think there's a glut of oil. Let's fill up the reserve. The price was $24.95 a barrel. Just remember this because I had to write an article on it. And the Democrats said, no way, you're just supporting big oil. We're getting off of fossil fuels. We don't need fossil fuels. President Biden, Trump, so they didn't do it. Do you realize if they allowed them to buy that oil at $24.95, it was at 107? I did the math. The U.S. taxpayers, if they would have let Trump do it, it would have made $10.5 billion. $10.5 billion, but they didn't do it. Now, Biden's selling the oil high, and he's buying it back higher. He made an announcement last week. It's like, hey, we're releasing oil from the reserve, because of the war in Ukraine and Putin's price hike. But now we're going to have to, but then he announced, we're going to buy it back 6 months from now. It's like, wait a second. All right, now, just from a trader viewpoint, Trump's a better trader, buy it low, sell high. He's selling high and then going to, buy it back higher. So,
Well, if you remember the story, I think the president's as good an oil trader as former Chancellor of the Exchequer Gordon Brown was at timing the gold market for Great Britain when he sold all of Great Britain's gold at the bottom of the gold market a little over 20 years ago at $250 an ounce.
yeah, it's like,
Next
that's what we
question.
are. Yeah.
Excellent discussion of energy. Perhaps we should be thinking like the Chinese do, long-term, 25, 50 years ahead. In terms of peak energy, peak oil, peak natural gas, I had a question about uranium. Do you believe that we have enough uranium to satisfy energy needs for centuries? Is that possible?
We really do. I mean, I think someone earlier said that, rare earth minerals are not that rare. It's just finding them in the concentrations that make it economic to mine it. And, in the United States, we have over 1 billion pounds of known and likely resources of uranium in probably 8 or 9 Western states. We're barely tapping that at all today, and so we can build up. Uranium is not rare in the Earth's crust. It's just finding the economic deposits that you can mine for a profit. So yeah, if we increase nuclear energy, we triple the usage of nuclear energy globally. We've got plenty of uranium to supply. That's one of the benefits. And it's a very stable fuel. It's only 5 to 8% of the generating costs. So if the price of uranium should double or triple, it doesn't impact the electricity cost. With natural gas, 75% of the generating cost is the fuel, is the gas itself. So like in Texas last summer when cold weather and the supply crunch, and you saw the $10,000 power bills, uranium is a much better hedge on price volatility on the fuel side.
No, for sure. Mike?
Yeah, have you guys considered the fact that you have a really good neighbor to the north in Canada who's effectively a potential energy superpower? We have reserves of coal, which is old energy. We have a shit ton of oil and natural gas reserves all throughout the country. We also have lots of lithium, lots of uranium, and then we have the copper, nickel, and the rare earths and all those other lovely minerals that we need for the new green economy. So what do we have to do to get the United States and Canada together to think about this in terms of a North American project instead of, Biden buying his oil from, questionably states like Venezuela and Saudi Arabia? By the way, our crazy is a little bit more benign than their crazy. And maybe take a look north and get Keystone through. Thank you.
We would be all in favor of Alberta, Saskatchewan, and Manitoba joining the United States if that's
Absolutely.
possible. We would take them in a heartbeat. And they may actually want to go. But no, absolutely. In the uranium industry, mines in northern Saskatchewan are the richest in the world and our major supplier to the U.S. That's a plus for us. So yeah, we fully love the mineral supplies coming from Canada. It's part of a, energy independence. Doesn't mean we don't trade internationally, but we trade with countries that share our values and interests, and Canada's clearly in that boat.
Let me throw something in there real quick, too, and anybody else can weigh in on this, but I think it was Abe Drost, when we were recording his presentation several days ago, was pointing out that Biden's ambassador to Canada has been very active in the country. I guess in one sense you could say, okay, maybe they want to graduate from getting stuff from China to maybe trying to get it from Canada. I would suggest that all of us as citizens, not just investors, would look to public companies, would look to politicians, and say, look, we need to dust off the Monroe Doctrine, and not just where Canada's concerned, but China's influence in Latin America has been growing anew. I can tell you from one specific example, Ecuador, they would rather not have that. They would rather it be the US, Canada, Australia, et cetera. So I think there is an element of understanding, even though it still leaves US-based minerals for the moment relatively high and dry. There is an understanding in this government that they want to get a lot of stuff from Canada in years to come, which is why when I look at different opportunities and so forth from an investment standpoint, I'll take XYZ companies' nickel deposit or lithium deposit in Canada over the average one, unfortunately, in the U.S. at this point in time until policy changes, right, Ryan?
No, yeah, I agree. I mean, I wasn't aware of clean air metals before I went to this conference. It was something that I learned, and it piqued my interest because, you know, from a stock perspective, I'm looking at it, it's 17 cents per share. And, you know, they want to mine copper and nickel. And then I think about Polymet here in Northeast Minnesota. Their share price is hovering around $2.50 a share, and they want to mine the same minerals, copper, nickel, and palladium metals. And I was just kind of thinking, man, this is, you know, just from knowing that and just knowing from how much friendlier policy is to mining in Canada, you know, I thought I was like, man, it's a great buy. Personally, I think, yeah.
I mean, the question is, and where did Eric? Oh, there's Eric. Do we have any other questions?
Hey, Chris, you talked about Bitcoin at the outset. Is there a conservative Bitcoin play right now with all the ads on Super Bowl TV, you know, Coinbase, stuff like that? Is there a conservative play in Bitcoin?
I talked about Bitcoin?
I think they did mention about the power generation.
Yeah,
Oh, the power, yeah.
Yeah.
mining of Bitcoin, and they're using nuclear power plants with the green energy to mine Bitcoin.
Right.
I am not a Bitcoin crypto expert, though.
I'm
Chris
not.
is.
You're what?
I'm not an expert in cryptos. So.
Well, I've got a little. Actually, this is one of the things I've invested into it. I'm not saying that you should, but it's crazy. We think that, and I'm going to call you. I want to get anybody has Elon number, give it to me. I have a guy who's created a new blockchain, because the problem with blockchain is it's stupid, right? I mean, to do the mining and the transactions takes enough energy to power 3 countries. That doesn't seem like it's very efficient currency, right? So the blockchain also is it's hard to scale. It slows down the more people that use it, right? And because the way that you verify the transactions are computer to computer to computer. So obviously it bogs down. And some of the new technologies, like how can we make blockchain faster, right? How can we make these transitions faster? Well, this professor and he's just getting started and been working on it 7 years. He's got a patent called Rata technology, Rata Tech. And they're supposedly going to be trading on the Bitmart exchange soon. They're trading overseas. But anyway, his technology, to make it simple, is instead of blockchain, computer to computer, you have it through the cloud. So instead of the energy of 3 countries to do all the transactions, you can do it with the energy in this room, basically. And so theoretically, because you don't have to go through millions of computers, it's a lot faster, okay? So this is definitely startup, high risk, but even Elon Musk, who's pro cryptocurrency, you know, has concerns about the energy consumption, you know. But, you know, when you look, speaking to Emily, she's done the history of money, you know, and how you do that. She was talking about this. But, you know, when you look at the transactions, you know, money, the way things change, I mean, how many people have as much cash in their wallet today than they had, you know, 10 years ago or 20 years ago, right? We used to laugh at people if they paid for their groceries with a credit card. It's like, are you crazy? You know, but that's how money changes, right? Nobody carries cash. Nobody carries money anymore. And so to ignore cryptocurrency is a mistake. The Federal Reserve and the government and the Biden administration, they are not ignoring it because they're already working on a digital currency. So it's coming. We might not understand it all, but we do. This is going to be the next form of money. We don't believe that blockchain is going to be able to survive. It has to be replaced, because it's not efficient, right? I know in the energy, it seems like we're trying to go from efficient fuels to less efficient, but actually, it's not green. If you're a green energy person, blockchain is dirty, right? And so that's why I think, now, is this going to be the breakthrough technology that's going to be accepted? I have no idea. I still am betting on Betamax, okay? It's going to come through. All right, but it is an alternative, and I think whoever finds that is going to be very rich. So anyway, sorry I got off case.
Yeah.
There you go.
One more question?
I just had a couple of quick comments in terms of the power usage for a proof of work like a Bitcoin. There isn't a great solution to that, and that is an issue. I do have some Bitcoin mining machines running on hydroelectric, but I also make the case that I'm using hydroelectric that could be used for other purposes. So if you talk about the whole chain of how energy is used, I don't know that there's a really good solution for proof of work systems. In terms of the ability to scale, Bitcoin can scale. The developer, there's one major development organization that controls most of the development for Bitcoin right now. It's very centralized and not decentralized from a programming perspective, has decided not to increase the block size. But if they increase the block size, Bitcoin can scale, and that's the way that Bitcoin was developed. Bitcoin SV and Bitcoin Cash, which are forks of the original Bitcoin, have done that. They're more efficient from a transaction perspective, so is Hedera's, Hashgraph Hedera's, HBAR, as well as some other cryptos. So there are answers to the crypto puzzle. They're just not necessarily in the current implementation of Bitcoin, but it can scale.
How fast can they go now? Do you know? I mean, because your speed, doesn't it slow down? Do you know? Or
I think
the transactions?
Bitcoin SV can do 50,000 transactions a second, and I think HBAR is somewhere between 20 and 30 to 40. So Bitcoin SV is a little bit more than what you need to do, like all the Visa and MasterCard transactions.
My guy, if he's right with this technology, and I'm not a
Yeah.
scientist, he can do like 1,000 times more than that, in seconds. And so just, I don't understand the science. I gave him money, and I hope he does. Okay.
So if you can provide that information, I'd love to look at
Yeah,
it.
Radatech, RAID, I'd be happy to. If you want to meet,
Yeah.
the guy's name is Sean Worthington. If you want to ask him questions.
Yeah, I'd love to have him on my show, so I'll
Yeah.
meet up with you afterwards.
Absolutely.
Thanks.
Yeah.
Any other questions? All right. Do you have anything that you need to do as we end, Eric?
No, just thank everybody for coming and
Thank you, guys. This was exciting
have a
to see
safe
you all
drive
here.
home, and we hope to
go.
see you in November.
Thank you.
Appreciate everyone's support.